Neggers. Mariska Herweijer is unfortunately not available for personal reasons this afternoon, so I will be your session chair, and the session is on virtual and persistent presence from a mobility perspective. We have two speakers, and they promised that you will be able to enjoy the nice weather this afternoon well in time according to the schedule. Klaas Wierenga is the first speaker. He will introduce the topic, and the second speaker, Henk Eertink, will show very concretely what Klaas, Henk and others are doing in this respect. Klaas Wierenga is Innovation Manager at SURFnet in the Netherlands. He's working in the group of Ton Verschuren. His main research interests are technology for electronic learning and mobile networking. He's heavily involved in the Gigaport project on these topics. He coordinates the GPRS pilot that we are running there, and a number of activities on mobile services, Mobile-IP and virtual presence, which he will address this afternoon. Klaas.
Thanks, Kees. First of all, thank you for showing up with two other sessions competing, and mainly the beach and the sun. The title of my talk is Virtual and Persistent Presence from a Mobility Perspective, and I've chosen that title because I think presence is more or less the natural counterpart of mobility, and I will come to that later. So what I'm going to do is give a very broad overview over what, according to us, presence is, its relations with mobility, ubiquitous access, and then Henk will show how we implement that and tell a little bit about our plans for the future. So, to start with, I thought I should look in the dictionary what virtual and persistent presence actually means. Well, the first thing I learned from it is that there's nothing new under the sun. The word presence actually dates from the 14th century, but more important, what it is the idea of being present somewhere. So, when it turns to virtual, again, a very old term, I think the best thing to describe virtual in this context is the first one, being such an essence of effect, though not formally recognized or admitted, or perhaps the third one, not being there physically, but you can infer the presence of someone by other means. And lastly, persistent, the idea that you are present for a long period of time, perhaps forever. And what I personally think is a very nice connotation is the continuing to exist in spite of interference or treatment. The idea that you probably can do nothing about it is perhaps a bit scary, but also a very interesting thought. So, what's the relation with mobility? Well, what you see nowadays is that there are lots of techniques to get online. I've divided them in two scales, one from fixed to nomadic, the other from wired to wireless, but I could have chosen other ways of dividing up the spectrum. But what you see is that there are lots of techniques. You can all use them to access the internet, but what is important, they all have different characteristics. You have, for instance, you can connect to the internet via a GSM network where you have very low bandwidth, but you can access the internet everywhere where there is GSM coverage, which means the whole world apart from the United States, more or less. The successor of GSM, the GPRS network, which is essentially a packet-switched GSM network, which comes much closer to what the internet is about, but also wireless LANs where you have relatively high bandwidth. You can do a bit of roaming. You could perhaps even do roaming on a rather large scale, but that's pretty difficult and because you have to deal with access. But the main thing is you can be always online, or practically always online. So how are you going to deal with that? Well, one thing is I don't want to have to switch to other configurations every time when I enter the office from the outside. So I want to be able to roam both horizontally, which means in the same type of network, so from one wireless LAN cell to the other. But I would also like to use my GPRS phone to connect to the internet while I'm in the train. And when I enter our office, I would like my network interface to automatically pick up the fact that I'm near a wireless LAN and switch to the wireless LAN without me knowing it, apart from perhaps the performance. And another interesting concept which is introduced by mobility is the concept of your physical location, and that can give you some very interesting possibilities for services based on your physical location. And the example most used for that is things like where's the nearest pizzeria, services like that, but you can also probably think of lots of other very important services that you could provide when you have someone's physical location. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. Just observe that the waist of my hourglass is very small. You have all heard Steve Deering's talk about this, and I think he spent lots of time explaining what I wanted to explain in a couple of words, so I'm not going to do that again. I just want to point out that this is something which is very important when you deal with mobile access, especially when you bring the GSM and GPRS and perhaps later the UMTS world into the internet, because they have a history of providing all kinds of services that are very proprietary. Think of SMS, now they brought web, and they call it internet access, but to my opinion that's very poor internet access. So when you bring in those new kinds of networks onto the internet, it's very important to try to keep that end-to-end model alive from the internet and try to keep the waste as small as possible. Now, how are we going to do that? Eventually, well, there are potentially millions or billions of new machines or devices or whatever accessing the internet, so you need lots of addresses. Well, IP version 6 can provide that, and the before mentioned vertical roaming possibility, the possibility to change from one network protocol to the other without losing your IP stack. You can do that with mobile IP, and well, when you combine the two, you get mobile IP version 6. And at this point I was going to mention the fact that Steve Deering was giving a talk on that on Friday, but yesterday he told me that he isn't going to do that because it's not ready yet, but in a couple of months it will be ready, and then that would be a very interesting possibility to have mobile IP version 6 where you can roam and you have plenty of address space, so no need for network address translation, and the possibility to change your network layer whenever you want. So now we can be always online, we can communicate whenever, wherever we want, but do we want that? Do we want to be available always? Do we want, when we are connected via a very slow link, someone to set up a video conference with us? And that's where I think presence comes in. Presence to me means the telling the network and other users of the network and other devices on the network what your capabilities are many pixels your display has, but also things like, oh yes, I want to be able to accept a voice call by Kees, but I'm willing to video conference with Henk, for instance, or when I'm in a meeting, that person and that person can reach me, but the other person can't. Things like that, you could express that all when you introduce the concept of presence. So, combined, I think the human and technical constraints together provide the basis of presence and the type of information you want to be able to give to the network. I've put down as middleware behind it, and that's a bit beforehand. I wanted to come back to that later, but before I show some examples of commercial implementations of a presence concept, I just want to point out that with all these implementations, all these examples, it's very proprietary, so there's no way of exchanging information between the various implementations. And by stating presence information as middleware, I mean there should be, or it would be very advantageous if you have a middleware layer providing some generic set of information which needs to be defined, because there is still a lot of work to do in that area, but that would benefit a lot of applications. So, some examples. Well, the most popular probably is ICQ. I read they have nowadays 100 million subscribers. Well, that's not really users, because a lot of people get an account and forget about it, or have 10 accounts or things like that. But it is a very impressive number for a company that started only a couple of years ago. And what they essentially do is they provide a so-called buddy list. That's what they started with. And that buddy list shows who of your buddies is available. And then they extended it a bit, and now you can tell I am available for that person, but not for that person. I could do Microsoft Net meeting. I could do IP telephony, whatever you can name, you can think of, you can specify. I have that capability, and those are the users, my friends, my buddies, I am willing to do it with. Another example is GUI. What they did is they said, well, there are a lot of people surfing the same website. They are not aware of each other's presence. Why not add something so that you can see who else is present on the same website? And, well, when you do that, why not provide some means of communication? So now you can see who else is looking at the same web page, and you can get into contact with them. You can exchange text, but also pictures and even movies. Active worlds, that's presence, virtual presence, really put to the max, more or less, where you try to imitate the normal world by making puppets, and you can even put your own face on them when you take a picture of that. And then you can walk around a world that either or not resembles the real world. You can build the world more or less like you want to. And it's, for instance, used for experiments in chemistry, where you can really manipulate molecules, talk about it, the teacher can be present. And so, while you are distributed over the country or over the world, you can interact with each other more or less like you were in the same classroom. Then another example where you are not present yourself anymore, but where something else is acting on behalf of you, a so-called intelligent agent. This example is Gossip, which is a Dutch invention, and the only really interesting thing they did, I think, is they put a very nice user interface to it. So what you do now is when you have some question you want to have answered, you instruct these little animals or whatever they are to go onto the internet and fetch the information, and then the gate will open and they will swim outside, and you can tell them you can be away for 1 hour or 1 day or 1 week or whatever, and then they will, whether you are available or not, they will try to find that information. The last 2 examples. First, an example of a new thing you can do when you have the physical location of someone available, LocationNet. What they do is they use GPS or GSM phone information to tell the physical location of the user to the system, and as a user you can point out what types of services or shops or whatever you are interested in, and it's on your Palm Pilot connected to the internet via one way or the other. You will be able to see, in this case, for instance, where the hotels and the bed and breakfasts are. And the last example of what you can do when you have information about the preferences of a person available is what all the big internet shops do, but CD Now I just took as an example. When you tell them what your preferences are, what music you like, they recommend other records, and they do that by comparing your profile to the profile of other users, and then make recommendations. So when someone who has bought the same record as me before, he will probably be interested in the same records I buy later, which can give some very funny results, but I will not tire you with that. So, to sum up, more or less, what is presence after you've seen these examples? It's information about the environment you are in, real or virtual, so you can express things like I am in Antalya in a meeting room, but also I am present on this web dev location on the other side of the globe or whatever. What you are doing, you could be able to tell I am now editing section 4 of paragraph 5 of chapter this and this of this document, who you are or who you pretend to be, and your preferences, the before mentioned, I want to be able to receive a voice call, or I just want to receive black and white images, all things like that. The other group of information you would like to provide with presence is the notion of where someone is, where something is, and we are on the same collection, we are on the same web page, so or in the same conference room. I would be interested in, for instance, when I'm in the train, to find out whether there are any colleagues of mine in the same train, so we could get together and talk about work or whatever we want to like to talk about. And finally, the persistent part of it, you want to be able to have a presence on the internet always. So if I want to get into contact with either of you, I want to be able to go somewhere and find out whether I can reach you, and if so, how I can reach you. So how does that look? And I've borrowed a picture from Henk used before. These are the kinds of statements you would like to make. As a user, you would like to say, this is my name and I'm interested in these kind of things. As a device, you would want to tell the the network, what capabilities you have. The network itself would be able to say, I have this capacity available for you, or this is my total capacity. Systems should be able to tell what services they like to offer to you or to other service. And finally, the physical information could tell the network some interesting things. For instance, when you are somewhere near the North Pole, you might automatically receive the location of the nearest igloo, which can be very helpful when it's getting really cold. So, this was just what we would like. When it comes to implementing it, then you run into problems. And the main reason is because it involves a lot of services. I've just listed a couple of them, probably the most important ones, and I think by far the most important of those important ones is the whole privacy and related to that the security aspects of it. When you give away so much information about yourself and about your capabilities, that is very interesting for companies that want to spam you, but also for more serious things. You don't want your insurance company, for instance, be able to look closely to all your medical records, for instance. But other things is nobody has agreed on a uniform way of describing entities. Most of them do something with either URIs or email-like addresses, but they are all different. And the IMPP working group in the ITF, for instance, is trying to solve that. But now there are 4 competing proposals, and they all more or less adopt a different scheme of dealing with it. So that has to be solved first. I'm not going to spend more time on this one, I think. Just to mention a couple of standardization efforts. Well, the good thing is a lot of groups and companies are interested in this subject. There is a lot going on directly or indirectly related to presence, but on the other hand, that's also the disadvantage of it, because you can be pretty sure that all these groups will have their own way of dealing with it. So I think it's about time that some common protocol is really adopted, will really, if you like, win. So, because I think at this moment it's not so important which one of the proposals is the best. I think it's more important that some common proposal is adopted. And one other thing is what you can see from these groups. For instance, the last 2, they are backed by groups that are, well, to say it positive, restricted to one kind of companies, and it's questionable whether they will come up with the best uniform solution. So, to conclude, and before giving the podium to Henk with this demonstration, presence is not something new. I showed some examples. It was there also in the early days of the internet, but it has become increasingly important because you can be always online, and you can be online with so many different types of devices. Presence as a generic middleware layer is desirable because if you have something like that, it is relatively easy to build all kinds of new services. I cannot think of all the services you could build with it, but at least existing services like instant messaging, location-based services, and all types of personalization services would be much easier if you have some general platform to discover and enter this information. And lastly, privacy is a very important concern that needs to be addressed if you are dealing with presence. Thanks.
Thank you, Klaas. Are there questions for Klaas? No? Thank you, Klaas. Then the next speaker is Henk Eertink. He is a senior researcher at the Telematica Instituut in the Netherlands. His research interests are end-to-end quality of service management and generic services for the mobile environment, like virtual presence, user profile management, and content adaptation technology. He's also involved in the Gigaport project, where he coordinates the technical activities in a number of application projects.
Okay, sorry, I had to put on my own laptop because I wanted to give a small demonstration. Didn't install it on that PC. I'd like to show you some of the work that we currently do together with the University of Ulm and SURFnet, and we then is the Telematica Institute from the Netherlands. We run a project, it's called Location-Based Presence. It's part of the Gigaport project, and it has been co-funded by Cisco. Actually, I'm only supervising this, right? So all the technical guys were not able to come. So I'm holding this presentation. What are we going to talk about? First, what is it? What is location-based presence? Secondly, I'm going to talk to you about component groupware. We are actually targeting this environment for cooperative work. Then I'll go into more detail about the actual project objectives, and then I'll give a small demo. Okay, location-based presence. Klaas already told you a lot about that. So how do you meet people currently on the internet? Well, what you most often do, you do some kind of a directory lookup. When you want to send an email, you have an address book or whatever, or an LDAP server. You look up whom you want to contact, and everything goes automatically, more or less. And then the second way is, as Klaas has illustrated, are the online buddy list. So you have a client, you contact to a centralized. Okay. You have an online buddy list, and then you have a client, and actually you tell the server that you are online. And until you look off of that server, everybody else can see that you are online because you contact the same server. But then what about occasional meetings? I don't know how you live, but most of the time I talk to people, it's more or less occasionally. I walk into somebody else's office, or I speak somebody, I don't know what, by walking around, something like that. Somebody pops into my office. Or in a library, you meet people in a library, or you work together in an educational center, and how do you know when somebody else is working also? Or in a group that actually works together on the design, something like that. So we actually work on that type of things, occasional meetings, and we base ourselves on the results from the CoGrow project, which has been a project run by the EU, and the guys from Ulm actively participated in that. Okay, so what do concept of a virtual location, which is typically represented by a URL. I don't care whether it's an HTTP URL or something else, but it's a URL which is currently the basis of our presence information. What we also do is we extend web browsers. So we have a client which is actually pulled very closely to a web browser. I can show that later. And that client actually performs the presence announcement. So we don't do anything on the server side, which is quite a difference when you compare it to the personalization type of services that Klaas is referring to, because the technology that's being used there is typically by using cookies and have a centralized database at the server which actually retrieves the cookie from your system and then sees what you have done earlier. And then we have a second type of service which is a presence server, and the presence server actually computes some kind of a vicinity, so whether you are close or not to somebody else. So, when you are on the internet, we simply have a web browser client which contacts via the internet a server. And we have a second one which can contact another server, of course. So we extend both browsers with the presence client, and the presence client actually actually observes what the browser is doing. So that is a bit of a problem, of course. So we have a specialized version for Internet Explorer and for Netscape, because you have to observe some kind of events what's going on there. And we have a presence protocol that actually transmits the activities of a user, notably the location that he's visiting, to the presence server. And on the other hand, the protocol allows you to actually subscribe to other persons' activities. So that means that when, for instance, this web browser now also visits this service, then it will notify the presence server, and the presence server can notify this present client that he's actually moving. And we have some kind of federation between different services so that they can exchange actually presence information, so we can scale better. So what are we storing? It's not so much. The updates can be very quick. So we want to store as little as possible in the actual present server. So it's only a name and some kind of contact information that you preferably store as an LDAP URL. So from LDAP you can retrieve all kinds of information like a telephone number and things like an H323 address and things like that. And some kind of current location, of course. That's a URL, so it can either be a logical location or a physical location. And what we also currently do is add some attributes on that, and one example is a lock on editable object. So we integrate with WebDAV repositories and actually transmit locking state via presence services. But what we not do yet, so we actually do more kind of virtual presence and not really persistent presence. Is things like the current state of a terminal that you are using. So when you have multiple terminals, we cannot see whether you are online in one terminal and not online on another one. And we're also not very good at access control this right now. Then to the groupware part, right? We wanted to support groups. Groupware is about sharing knowledge and working together. So you need some kind of feed-through of other one's activities. And the guys from our institute are actually actively working on solving a problem that there are too many tools and they actually do not cooperate very well. So that's why they define a CocoWare architecture, which is some kind of a component-based collaborative software architecture. So it's component-based, and that means that users can mix and match tools according to their needs. So they can plug in all kind of different tools together. It can evolve over time, right? So users can extend the system. So they can plug in new things, etc. And another prime example is that it's client-side only, which is pretty important because we can integrate on the client side, so I can choose to integrate different tools and Klaas can integrate other tools and then some kind of a coordination policy will well, we don't depend on one another, right? And the CocoWare principle means that tools and components must be wrapped or ideally adhere to some kind of an interface. So you have a simpler component model and you can plug in different kinds of tools, you can plug in different kinds of presence clients or whatever, and they then combine. The central ideas are here. I stole this picture, of course. There is in the center there's a conference manager who's responsible for doing the signaling. So typical implementation would be kind of a SIP client or an H323 client like NetMeeting. We have kind of conference enablers. Those are tools with which you can meet one another. So it can be an LDAP client, it can be a presence client, it can be something that actually gives you information about who can you meet. Then there are conference tools who do actually the communication, basically managed by the conference manager. The coordinator is not very relevant here. So we in the project we try to integrate those two types of work. So we have a virtual presence system and we integrate that in a collaboration environment. That's the main objective of the work that we are currently doing. And we like to run a pilot with that. So we like to find some kind of groups of people and put the technology there and see what kind of chemistry is going on there. The current status, I can show you a demo. It's from the beginning of this year. Actually, I hope for a newer version, but yeah, you know how that goes. And the current work was not that stable that I actually dared to show that to you. So we're currently working on the generalization of the data model. That should support most of the mobility stuff that Klaas is actually referring to. We work on wrapping additional applications and existing presence systems. So in the same user interface, you can also go to your ICQ or whatever client. So integrate your buddy list at least from a user point of view, and of course on security. So if you look at the architecture, the light blue. No, you can't see that here. This thing here is the client. Right, it runs on every PC. I have one running on my PC and Klaas has one on his PC. Then there is an Internet Explorer which connects to the web. Then we have a small client actually very close to the Internet Explorer which actually puts information in the present server and retrieves it. This one is, I think, running at our site now. And there is a NetMeeting client which can talk to any H323 peers. So you don't really have to use the CocoWare environment. This is the CocoWare environment which actually integrates the browser and the NetMeeting tool. Right? Okay. What we can show in the demo is, of course, awareness. Controlled visibility, so I can actually control whether the other person see me or not. And I can show you feed-through for WebDAV logs. Or WebDAV, I don't know whether you're familiar with that. That's a kind of a distributed file system based on web technology. It's a recent IETF standard. And you can actually log files there for users and so other people cannot actually at least show that the file has been logged and that somebody else is actually working on that. And we show that we actually integrated NetMeeting for synchronous communication. That's not very spectacular. Okay, for more info on the work that we currently do, you can contact either Klaas or me. The work on component groupware, it's done at our institute, at Telematica Instituut. You can have a URL there. And the present service that we are currently using is a VPS system which is being developed at the Technical University of Ulm, the Verteilte Systemen Internet Explorer and another client next to that, which is the Cocoa browse system that I mentioned earlier. I'm now at the Terena website, and I'm the only one who's there. You can see that here, and I have an hourglass on that, and or some kind of a binoculars things like that. That shows that I'm actually working on this page right now. But there's nobody else. I don't know why. At least nobody with this environment. I discussed, of course, we prepare things. So if I look at our CSCW site, I'm actually logged in here now. This is a site that is being managed by the CSCW, by our group for the CSCW site, and you can see one of my colleagues, Hans Kruse, who is also visible there. He's actually working now on that website. So what I could do is actually invite him, or he could invite me. I don't know what we actually discussed. Anyway, I can try to invite him. I don't know what's happening. Right. So I have a number of options there, but I only installed NetMeeting on this PC, so I can now actually from this interface where I see somebody else, I can invite him via that tool. Well, this morning it didn't work, so I hope it's now working. We had some kind of a networking problem. But probably it doesn't work right now. Yeah, geez. So I'll try with Klaas. That's probably better. But what you at least can see, we have a number of persons here, and when I visited it, you get some feed through of that. The other part of the system is here. So we now go to a WebDAV server, and this is actually, as if everything's okay, is this the site where Klaas is, and Hans is also there. No, it's not there anymore. Klaas was there, and he's actually logged the file as you see. So now I am looking at the document, but Klaas is probably editing it. So I could actually open up a meeting with him. That should work. At least we're on the same network, and that makes it a lot easier for tools like NetMeeting. Okay, that works. So you add the tool, Klaas, or shall I do that? Setting. Well, anyway, I mean, this is the standard lousy NetMeeting interface that we are using here. I can see you can see that Klaas is actually working on that. So the typical situation that we use this for is that we also have audio, right? Because I hear myself here. Anyway. Yeah, we also have audio, so we can even talk with Klaas. So okay. But what you typically see in groups, at least for the groups that we are actually working, is that this is a very typical situation. So you work together, you see that somebody else is doing something, and you want to talk, right? We can integrate it with normal telephony as well, using the telephone API of Microsoft, which is also present in most of the operating environments, which makes it quite useful actually to work together. So Klaas has locked the tool. So when I go back, for instance, to the directory where this is residing, and I try to open it myself, I should use edit. So if I try to edit this thing, I cannot open it for read-write. I can probably open it in Word, but it will open it in read-only mode. it in read-only mode because Klaas has actually locked it. And this is of course what you would have expected. This is more a web dev demonstration. Okay. Let me see. So if you now unlock, can you also unlock it? Okay, you've done that. Okay, so I can see, got the feed through that Klaas has unlocked it. Now I can actually open it again. Not in read-only mode. That's how it works. Okay. What else can I show? Oh well. So what we actually saw here. That was net meeting. So what we saw is that I could get some awareness of the remote users. We have some kind of a controlled visibility. Oh, we didn't show the controlled visibility anyway. You can actually hide your visibility for others. You have feed-through for web dev, and we have some integration with NetMeeting for synchronous communication. And I show this one when I take some questions.